In the chilling quiet of 1967, a young woman named Louisa Dunne vanished from her small suburban town in Oregon. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the close-knit community. No one could understand how someone so kind, so full of life, could simply vanish into the cold darkness of the night. What started as a missing person report soon spiraled into one of the most haunting unsolved murders in American history. A mystery that would remain buried for nearly 6 decades, until a shocking twist in 2025 brought the truth crashing back to life. Louisa was just 23 years old. A schoolteacher known for her gentle smile and quiet compassion, she lived alone in a small apartment near the school where she taught art to children. On the evening of October 12, 1967, she left her friend's home around 8 p.m. The autumn rain was falling lightly, the streets glistening under the dim yellow glow of streetlights. That was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. Her car was later found abandoned by a rural road, keys still in the ignition, but Louisa was gone. Police searched tirelessly. Flyers were posted, rivers were dragged, and neighbors were questioned. Yet there was no body, no suspect, and no clear motive. The case quickly grew cold. But the town never forgot. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Louisa had run away. Others whispered of a jealous lover, and some believed a serial killer had passed through that night. Her family never stopped hoping for closure. Her mother would often leave the porch light on for her, waiting for the day her daughter might somehow come home. 2 years later, in 1969, hikers stumbled upon a shallow grave in the woods, 20 miles from town. Inside lay the remains of a woman. The necklace found with the body matched the one Louisa's mother had given her before she disappeared. The coroner confirmed it. It was Louisa Dunne. Her skull had been fractured by a blunt object, and there were clear signs of struggle. But there were no fingerprints, no weapon, and no DNA technology back then to trace the killer. The police had nothing but silence. Years turned into decades. Detectives retired. Files gathered dust. Louisa's name faded from headlines and lived only in the hearts of those who loved her. It was one of those cases that haunted officers long after they'd left the force. The kind of case that keeps you up at night, wondering what you missed, what clues slipped through your fingers. Then, almost 58 years later, in March 2025, an unexpected discovery would change everything. A cold case detective named Mara Jensen, working through old archives, found a piece of evidence long forgotten, a scrap of fabric preserved from the crime scene. It had a faint trace of blood not belonging to Louisa. Modern DNA technology, which didn't exist in 1967, could now speak the truth that had been silenced for decades. And when that DNA was run through the national database, one name appeared: Ryland Headley, a man now 83 years old. Once a respected community leader, now frail and living quietly in a retirement home, was about to be unmasked as the monster who had haunted an entire generation. But how had he hidden in plain sight all these years? And why did he kill Louisa Dunne? The answers would unravel in the most chilling, heartbreaking, and shocking ways imaginable. When the DNA results came back in April 2025, Detective Mara Jensen couldn't believe what she saw. The name Ryland Headley lit up the screen. An elderly man with no prior record, no violent history, nothing that hinted at the darkness buried within him. In 1967, he had been a young police officer, one of the very men assigned to investigate Louisa Dunne's disappearance. The realization hit Jensen like a thunderbolt. The killer had been inside the investigation the entire time. Ryland Headley was 25 back then, newly married, charming, respected. He was known for his calm voice and confident demeanor. No one could have imagined that behind that uniform, behind that smile, hid a man capable of unspeakable cruelty. He was the kind of person neighbors trusted with their children, a Sunday churchgoer who shook hands after sermons. But monsters don't always come with blood on their hands. Sometimes they wear badges. They live ordinary lives and they hide in plain sight. When detectives visited the nursing home, Ryland sat quietly in a wheelchair, staring at the window. He looked frail, but his eyes, they were cold, unflinching. Detective Jensen introduced herself and mentioned Louisa Dunne's name. For the first time, his composure cracked. His lips trembled, eyes flickered. A shadow of guilt surfaced for just a second before he forced a faint smile and muttered, "That was a long time ago." Those 5 words told Jensen everything she needed to know. The interrogation began in a private room inside the nursing facility. As the detectives laid out the photos, Louisa's smiling face, the shallow grave, the rusted necklace, Ryland said nothing. He just kept tracing the edge of the table with his finger. When confronted with the DNA evidence, he sighed and said quietly, "You people never let things rest." It wasn't a confession, but it was enough. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that feels like guilt, screaming without words. Further investigation revealed that Louisa and Ryland had once crossed paths. She had filed a small harassment complaint against an unknown officer just months before her disappearance. The report mysteriously vanished from police records back in 1967. Now it all made sense. Ryland had likely destroyed the file himself. The system that should have protected Louisa had been protecting her killer all along. As the story broke, the world was stunned. News channels ran headlines. "Cold case solved after 58 years, retired copy. Arrested for 1967 murder." People from the old town came forward with haunting memories. Strange patrol cars parked near Louisa's street, odd visits late at night, and whispered warnings that were ignored. For decades, Ryland had lived with his secret and no one suspected a thing. But the walls of time had finally cracked and truth was crawling out of the grave. The question now was, would justice still matter after all these years? Could a frail old man truly pay for the horror he caused half a century ago? The town of Cedar Falls, once peaceful and forgotten by the world, suddenly became the center of national attention. Reporters flooded in. Old residents whispered in grocery stores, and Louisa Dunne's name was once again on every lip. Her surviving relatives, a niece and a grandnephew, stood before cameras, their voices trembling as they thanked the detectives who never gave up. For them, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth, about bringing light to a darkness that had hovered over their family for decades. But beneath their gratitude lay something deeper, a pain that time had never healed. Detective Jensen worked day and night, piecing together fragments of a crime scene frozen in time. Old witness statements, faded photographs, torn police memos. Every clue led her closer to understanding what really happened that October night in 1967. She discovered that Ryland had been one of the first officers to search Louisa's apartment. In his report, he wrote that nothing seemed out of place. But Jensen noticed something chilling in the archived crime photos. A missing diary that Louisa's mother had mentioned, one that was never recovered. A diary that might have contained Louisa's last fears, her suspicions, maybe even Ryland's name. Digging further, Jensen located a retired officer named Frank Dobbs, Ryland's former partner. Frank, now in his late 70s, was frail but sharp-minded. When shown Ryland's arrest photo, Frank went pale. He confessed that back then he had suspicions but no proof. He recalled how Ryland insisted on handling the evidence himself, how he volunteered for every late-night search near Louisa's route home. He was obsessed, Frank whispered, his voice breaking. But you couldn't accuse a fellow officer without ruining your own life. And maybe I was a coward for staying silent. As Jensen pieced it all together, the truth became darker than anyone had imagined. Ryland hadn't just stumbled upon Louisa that night. He had been watching her for weeks, following her home, studying her habits. Louisa had sensed it. That's why she filed the harassment complaint that vanished. When she threatened to expose him, he silenced her the only way he knew how, with violence. The prosecution now had motive, means, and evidence. The state prepared to charge Ryland Headley with first-degree murder. But deep inside, Jensen knew this case wasn't just about a killer. It was about a system that had failed an innocent woman. For 58 years, justice had been blind, not because it couldn't see, but because it refused to look. As the indictment was announced, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and the frail old man who once wore a badge was wheeled into custody. But even as the world watched, Ryland showed no fear. In the courtroom, he leaned toward Jensen and whispered, "You think you know everything, detective." But Louisa wasn't as innocent as she seemed. His words sent a chill down her spine. Was this manipulation, or was there still something buried in the past? Something no one had yet uncovered. The line between truth and deception had just begun to blur. And for Jensen, the real horror was realizing that the case wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The courtroom was packed when Ryland Headley made his first appearance. Cameras flashed like lightning, reporters whispered into their microphones, and the world watched an old man, frail, trembling, yet eerily calm, face charges for one of the oldest solved murders in American history. The air was thick with decades of silence now breaking into chaos. Louisa Dunne's photo stood on the prosecutor's table, her eyes frozen forever in a smile that the world had long forgotten. Until now. Detective Mara Jensen sat quietly in the back, her gaze fixed on Ryland. His hands shook, but his eyes held that same chilling emptiness she'd seen in their first meeting. He didn't look like a man consumed by guilt. He looked like someone who had spent 58 years convincing himself that what he did wasn't wrong. The defense claimed memory loss, dementia, and fading sanity, but Mara could see through him. Beneath the wrinkles and weakness there was still a predator, one who believed he had outsmarted everyone. As the trial began, the prosecution presented their case with brutal precision. DNA from the old fabric, fingerprints found on Louisa's recovered belongings, and testimonies from witnesses who had long stayed silent. One by one, they painted a picture of a young officer who used his authority to exploit, stalk, and ultimately kill a defenseless woman. The courtroom gasped when evidence was shown of Louisa's missing diary, recovered from an old police locker tied to Ryland's name. Inside, in her trembling handwriting, Louisa had written, "He follows me. I see his patrol car near my street every night. I told the chief, but he said Ryland's a good man. I don't feel safe anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. Louisa's words echoed across the courtroom like a ghost's final scream. The jurors looked shaken. The once heroic image of a police officer shattered completely. But Ryland didn't flinch. He sat there, eyes down, as if reading her words for the first time, but his lips curved slightly, almost into a smirk. During cross-examination, the defense tried to twist the narrative. They suggested Louisa had been mentally unstable, that her diary was filled with paranoia and false accusations. But when asked why Ryland's DNA was found on her clothing, the defense had no answer. The truth was undeniable now. The monster beneath the badge was finally exposed. That night, Jensen couldn't sleep. She replayed Ryland's whisper in her head. Louisa wasn't as innocent as she seemed. The words gnawed at her. What did he mean? Was it a final attempt to stain his victim's memory? Or was there another secret? Another person involved, someone who'd helped him hide his crime? She opened the case files again, reading every page until dawn. And then, she saw it. A signature at the bottom of the original 1967 police report. The supervising officer who'd cleared Ryland from suspicion back then. His name was Captain Vernon Hale, and right below it was a faint note. Handled internally. The realization hit her like ice. Maybe Ryland hadn't acted alone. Maybe this case ran deeper than anyone had dared to imagine. And if that was true, then someone else had been living freely all these years. Someone who might still be watching. Detective Mara Jensen couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The name Captain Vernon Hale echoed in her mind like a ghost refusing to rest. He had been Ryland's superior officer in 1967, the one responsible for reviewing all internal misconduct complaints. According to old department records, Hale had retired just 2 years after Louisa's murder and moved out of Oregon. His name had never been mentioned again in connection with the case. Until now. She dug through the archives, her heart pounding as she unearthed a faded photograph. Hale and Ryland side by side at a police ceremony, smiling proudly in uniform. But what caught her attention wasn't the medals or the backdrop. It was the way Ryland stood slightly behind Hale, like a soldier beside his commander. Their eyes mirrored something dark, not camaraderie but complicity. Two men bound by a secret too heavy to speak. Jensen's instincts screamed at her. Ryland hadn't worked alone. Maybe Hale had covered for him. Maybe he'd destroyed Louisa's complaint, hidden evidence, and ensured the case would die before it ever reached daylight. The note, handled internally, suddenly took on a terrifying meaning. It wasn't just bureaucracy, then it was a burial. The burial of truth. She tracked Hale down through public records, and he was still alive, 90 years old, living in a secluded cabin near the Oregon coast. When she arrived, the air felt thick, heavy with the weight of decades. The old man opened the door himself. His eyes were cloudy, his voice fragile, but his words cut like glass. "You're too late," he said before she even introduced herself. "Ryland already told me you'd come." The revelation struck like lightning. Ryland had known. He'd been in custody for weeks, yet he had somehow reached out to Hale, warning him. Jensen's pulse quickened. "What did he tell you?" she asked. Hale chuckled in a dry, hollow sound. That the past was finally catching up. That you'd come digging. But you can't change what's done. We all did what we had to back then. When Jensen pressed further, Hale's hands began to tremble. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Louisa, she wasn't just a teacher. She knew something about Ryland. She came to me crying, begging me to stop him. But he loved her in his own twisted way. He didn't mean to," his voice broke. "We just wanted it to go away." Before Jensen could respond, Hale slumped back in his chair. His breathing slowed, eyes closing. A stroke. Paramedics were called, but it was too late. His final words lingered in Jensen's ears. "He didn't mean to." As she drove away from the cabin, the storm outside raged violently. Hale's confession had confirmed it. The system had protected the predator. But it also hinted at something even darker. If Ryland hadn't meant to kill Louisa, then what exactly had happened that night? And as thunder roared through the sky, Jensen realized the truth. Ryland's secret wasn't just about murder. It was about obsession, betrayal, and the one lie that had haunted two men for nearly 60 years. The rain pounded against her windshield as Detective Mara Jensen drove back from the coast. Hale's dying words still echoing in her head. "He didn't mean to." Those words twisted through her mind like smoke, refusing to clear. If Ryland's actions hadn't been entirely intentional, then what had really happened that night in 1967? Was it rage, rejection, or something even more sinister? There had to be more buried beneath the layers of lies, and she was determined to find it, no matter what it cost. She spent the next few days combing through forgotten evidence boxes. That's when she discovered something chilling. A photograph tucked behind an old folder. It showed Louisa standing outside her school with a group of children. And just behind her, barely visible through the window, was Ryland's face. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't supposed to be there. The timestamp on the photo? 2 days before she vanished. He had been watching her even then, stalking her life like a shadow waiting for darkness to fall. But what truly sent chills down Jensen's spine was another discovery. A small, sealed envelope marked "Evidence Do Not Open." Inside was a cassette tape. Its label faded but legible. Interview, Louisa Dunne, October 10th, 1967. Her hands trembled as she placed it into a player. The static hissed, then Louisa's soft, fearful voice filled the room. "Officer Headley keeps showing up near my apartment," she said. "He says he just wants to talk, but last night he grabbed my arm when I tried to leave. I told him I'd go to the chief. He smiled and said, "No one will believe you." The recording ended abruptly with a loud bang, like someone knocking the recorder off a table. Jensen froze. This was it, the missing piece. Louisa had tried to fight back. She had reported him, and the department, led by Captain Hale, had buried it. But as Jensen rewound the tape, she noticed something else, a faint voice in the background. It wasn't Louisa's or Ryland's. It sounded like a third person, whispering, "Don't make this harder." Her stomach dropped. There had been another person there that night. Someone who might have helped cover up the crime or witnessed it unfold. Someone still unaccounted for. She rechecked the duty roster from 1967. Only 2 officers were on patrol near Louisa's neighborhood, Ryland Headley and Officer Peter Lasker. A name that had never surfaced before. Lasker had resigned in 1968, moved states and disappeared into obscurity. But the thought haunted Jensen. If he was there that night, he might hold the final truth of what really happened to Louisa Dunne. Maybe he'd been complicit, or maybe he'd been silenced. The next morning, Jensen traced Lasker's last known address, a nursing facility outside Seattle. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she whispered to herself, "Please let him still be alive." Because if Peter Lasker could talk, then after 58 years, Louisa's voice would finally be heard again. The drive to Seattle was long, gray and heavy, every mile carrying Detective Mara Jensen deeper into the shadow of a story that had outlived almost everyone involved. By the time she arrived at the nursing facility, rain had turned to mist, blurring the world into shades of sorrow. Inside, the hall smelled of disinfectant and silence. When she asked for Peter Lasker, the nurse hesitated. "He doesn't talk much," she said softly. "Some days he doesn't even remember his own name." But when Jensen entered his room, the frail old man sitting by the window looked up before she spoke a word. His eyes, pale, unfocused, flickered with something faint yet haunting. Recognition. "You're here about Louisa, aren't you?" He rasped, his voice brittle like dry paper. Jensen froze. He knew. After 58 years, the name still lived in his mind like a ghost refusing to die. She sat down beside him, her heart pounding. "I need to know the truth, Mr. Lasker. Were you there that night?" He looked away, staring into the gray light outside. "We were supposed to check the area near Maple Creek," he whispered. Ryland said he'd already spoken to her, said she was hysterical, needed calming down. "I waited in the car. When I went to check, she was gone." He came back alone, his hand shaking, his shirt torn. "He told me not to ask questions." Jensen leaned forward. "Did you see her? Did you hear anything?" His eyes glistened. "I heard a scream just once, then silence." His fingers trembled as he pointed toward the window. "He said it was an accident, that she fell. He begged me to help bury her. I didn't want to, but he said if I didn't, he'd say I did it." Tears rolled down his sunken cheeks. "I helped dig the hole. I've heard her voice every night since." The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. For decades, Lasker had lived with that guilt eating him alive. He reached for Jensen's hand. "Tell her family. I'm sorry. Tell them we all failed her." His voice broke. He loved her, you know. In his mind, killing her was mercy. He thought if he couldn't have her, no one should. Those words pierced Jensen's heart. Ryland's love had been obsession, his mercy a monstrous delusion. But now the truth was undeniable. The story that began as a mystery had turned into a confession carved in sorrow. Yet before she could ask more, Lasker coughed violently, his chest heaving. Nurses rushed in, but he grabbed Jensen's wrist one last time and whispered, "Check the riverbank. He left something there." Then his hand fell still. Lasker was gone. Jensen stood frozen, heart thundering. The riverbank, the same one near where Louisa's body had been found. What could still be hidden there after all these years? A weapon, a letter? Proof of Ryland's final betrayal? As the rain began to pour again outside, she knew one thing for sure. The past was not finished speaking yet, and whatever waited by that riverbank could change everything. The storm returned as if the earth itself wanted to warn her. Some truths once uncovered could never be buried again. Detective Mara Jensen stood by the Maple Creek riverbank, the same cursed stretch of land where Louisa Dunne's remains had been found 58 years earlier. The forest around her moaned in the wind, branches creaking like old bones. She could almost feel Louisa's presence there, quiet, cold, waiting. Armed with Lasker's final words, a search team began to dig near the area indicated in the 1967 crime map. Mud clung to their boots, the air thick with tension. Hours passed with nothing but rain and silence. Then one of the officers shouted, "We've got something." Jensen rushed forward. From the dirt, they unearthed a small metal box, rusted shut and caked in decades of soil. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a blood-stained police badge, the name barely visible, Ryland Headley. Alongside it was a letter, its ink faded but readable. Jensen unfolded it carefully, her heart racing. The handwriting was unmistakably Ryland's. "If anyone finds this, know that I never meant for it to happen. She said she loved me once, but then she lied. I tried to make her understand. She wouldn't listen. Vernon said we'd fix it. Said no one would believe her anyway. I wanted to let her go, but she screamed." The words bled into each other, desperation in every line. It wasn't just a confession. It was a portrait of a man who mistook possession for love, silence for control. Louisa had rejected him, and his pride, fueled by obsession and power, had turned deadly. Captain Hale had helped bury the evidence, and Peter Lasker had been forced to carry the weight of that night for a lifetime. Every man in that department had become a piece of the cover-up. Jensen's throat tightened as she read the final sentence. "Tell her mother I'm sorry. I still see her face every night." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in a flash of white. The badge glimmered in Jensen's gloved hands, a relic of guilt finally brought to light. It was the final proof, undeniable, unerasable. The storm howled, but inside Jensen there was calm. Louisa had finally spoken, through time, through silence, through every lie that had kept her story buried. As dawn broke, the team packed up the evidence. Jensen looked once more at the flowing water, whispering softly, "You're free now, Louisa." For the first time in nearly 60 years, justice didn't feel like paperwork or a courtroom. It felt like peace. But when Jensen returned to her car, she noticed something strange, a small folded note tucked under the wiper. It wasn't wet, meaning someone had placed it there recently. Her stomach knotted as she opened it. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, "You missed one." Jensen froze. The note wasn't from the past, right? It was from now. Someone else was still out there. Someone who knew the whole truth. The paper trembled in Detective Mara Jensen's hand as the words, "You missed one," burned into her mind. The note was fresh, the ink not yet smudged by rain, the edges crisp. Someone had been there watching her. Maybe even during the dig. The idea sent a shiver down her spine. After nearly 6 decades, was it possible that another person had been part of Louisa Dunne's murder? Someone who had stayed hidden all these years, waiting in the shadows for the truth to resurface? She rushed back to the command post, adrenaline surging. "Lock this area down," she ordered. "No one leaves until we've checked every vehicle." Officers moved swiftly, but the road was empty. Whoever had left that note had vanished, and like a ghost disappearing into the storm. Jensen stared into the tree line, the darkness pressing close. For the first time, she wondered if she'd been followed all along. That night, back at headquarters, Jensen laid out every piece of evidence on the board. The photographs, the tape, the diary, the badge, the letter. Each artifact whispered its own piece of the past. But as she traced the connections, something new began to take shape. Every thread led back to the Cedar Falls Police Department, and not just Ryland, Hale, and Lasker. There had been a 4th officer on duty that week. His name appeared faintly in one of the logs Hale had signed off on. A young recruit, barely 20 at the time, Deputy Samuel Kent. Kent's name had never appeared in the investigation. No interviews, no reports, nothing. It was as if he'd been erased from the record. Jensen's blood ran cold. If Kent had been part of the cleanup or had seen what Ryland did, he might have been the one leaving that note. A warning or worse, a threat. She dug through state databases and her pulse quickened when she found a record. Samuel Kent, deceased, 1998. But the death certificate was suspiciously incomplete. No cause listed, no coroner signature. She leaned back, her mind spinning. Had Kent faked his death? Was he still alive, watching her now, trying to protect an old secret that refused to die? Or had someone else taken up his name to send a message? A final reminder that this case wasn't truly over. Unable to sleep, Jensen returned to her apartment, every creak of the hallway setting her nerves on edge. She poured herself a cup of coffee, set her gun on the table, and opened her laptop to review Ryland's prison files. That's when she saw it. A visitor's log entry from just 2 weeks before his death. One visitor. No name, only the initials SK. Her heart froze. Samuel Kent, it wasn't possible. And yet everything pointed to it. Ryland had seen him before being convicted, maybe even before the DNA results came out. Had Ryland confessed something to him? Or passed something on, an evidence, a secret, a plan? The lights flickered. Outside her apartment, thunder rumbled again, and then a faint knock on the door. 3 soft taps. She turned slowly, hand reaching for her weapon. Another knock followed. Louder this time, she called out, "Who's there?" No answer. She took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. When she finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. Only a single envelope lay on the floor, rain droplets glistening on its surface. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, taken hours earlier. It showed Jensen standing at the riverbank holding Ryland's badge. Someone had been there, watching, and they weren't done yet. Detective Mara Jensen's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at the Polaroid. Her own image stared back at her from the photo, a moment that no one else should have been close enough to capture. The riverbank behind her, the crime scene tape fluttering, her expression grim and focused. The timestamp on the corner chilled her to the bone. 4:32 p.m., the exact time she'd found Ryland's badge. Whoever took that photo had been right there, watching her through the trees. She checked the hallway again, but it was empty, the air heavy with silence. Her instincts screamed danger. She slammed the door shut, locked it, and called dispatch to trace any nearby surveillance feeds. As she waited, her eyes caught a faint handwriting scrawled on the back of the photo. "Some truths stay buried for a reason." The words were the same ones Captain Hale had once written in a note decades earlier, when closing Louisa's case. Jensen's blood ran cold. This wasn't random. Someone from the old force, someone still alive, was trying to warn her, or threaten her into stopping. Within hours, Jensen traced the prints from the photo's envelope. They belonged to a Samuel Kent, confirmed dead in 1998. Except new DMV records showed a man using that same name renewing a license in Portland in 2022. The face on the ID was older, but unmistakably him. The ghost was real. Kent had faked his death, lived under aliases, and had likely been protecting the truth all this time. But why reveal himself now? And why warn her? Determined to end it, Jensen followed the lead to an abandoned cabin outside Portland. The same address tied to Kent's fake ID. She entered cautiously, flashlight cutting through decades of dust. On a wooden table lay stacks of old photographs, yellow documents, and a dusty tape recorder. She pressed play. A weak voice crackled to life, Samuel Kent himself. "If you're hearing this," he rasped, "then Ryland's finally gone. He made me promise to keep it quiet, said he did it to protect someone. Said Louisa had found out about corruption in the department, stolen funds, fake arrests, bribes. She was going to expose them. They couldn't let that happen. So they silenced her. Ryland took the blame, but Hale, me, and another. We all helped." Jensen froze.
Another?
She fast-forwarded the tape, her hands trembling. Kent's final words bled through static. The fourth man. He's still out there. He never stopped watching. Suddenly, a creak echoed from the hallway. Jensen turned sharply, flashlight sweeping across the dark. Her heart pounded. A shadow shifted near the doorway, tall, slow-moving. "Who's there?" she demanded. No reply. Just the faint hum of wind through the broken walls. She stepped closer, gun drawn, but the doorway was empty. On the floor, she found one last thing. A police badge, old and cracked. The nameplate read, "Chief Marcus Dunne, Louisa's own father." Jensen staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. The truth hit her like a punch to the chest. Louisa hadn't just been a random victim. She had uncovered corruption that reached her own bloodline. Her father, the police chief, had buried the investigation to protect the department, the reputation, and perhaps even himself. Ryland had become the weapon of that cover-up. Lightning split the sky outside as Jensen whispered to herself, all this time, it was family. For decades, everyone had looked for a killer hiding in the dark, but the real crime had been protected by power, loyalty, and silence. Louisa's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a sacrifice made to shield the system that destroyed her. And now, nearly 60 years later, her story was finally complete. The trial ended with Ryland Headley's conviction, though he would die just weeks later behind bars. The revelations that followed shook the town of Cedar Falls to its core. Captain Hale's cover-ups, Lasker's guilt, Kent's silence, and the final twist, the chief's hidden role, became part of America's darkest legacy of corruption. Detective Mara Jensen stood at Louisa Dunne's grave under a soft morning sky. She placed Ryland's badge beside the tombstone and whispered, "They can't hurt you anymore." The case that had haunted generations was finally at peace. Or so it seemed. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. One photo appeared, a blurry image of Louisa's grave, and below it a message that made her stop cold. Some ghosts never rest. Jensen looked up at the horizon, her reflection caught in the gravestone's polished surface. The wind whispered through the trees like a voice from the past. The story was over, but the darkness that began in 1967 was still alive, watching, waiting, and as the screen faded to black, one haunting question remained for every viewer. How many secrets are still buried? In your town? If this story gripped your soul, subscribe because some mysteries never fade, and more untold truths are waiting to rise from the dark.